In the 70s and early 80s, Burkina Faso was one of the most unstable countries in West Africa. A series of military coups had made the government look like a game of musical chairs. On the other hand, Ivory Coast was stable politically, and its founding father, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, was one of the most powerful leaders in Africa. Unfortunately, Boigny used his power to destabilize other countries in Africa, in most cases acting on behalf of France and the United States. His interference earned him the nickname Master Destabilizer. Ivory Coast interference started when its founding father, Boigny, sponsored the coup that ousted Kwame Nkrumah. Boigny sponsored a coup attempt in Benin, but did not manage to topple Mathieu Kérékou. In Angola, Boigny was the chief Sunzor of the UNITA rebels that destabilized the country for decades. His last interference, before his death in the mid-90s, was in Liberia in 1990, where he sponsored the ouster of and gruesome murder of President Samuel Doe. The most significant interference by Ivory Coast under Boigny was in Burkina Faso in the 80s, where he sponsored the coup that brought Thomas Sankara and his vice president, Blaise Compaoré, to power. Later, when Sankara refused to be his puppet, Boigny sponsored a violent coup against Sankara and installed Vice President Blaise Compaoré as the president of Burkina Faso. When he supported the rise of Sankara, Boigny thought Sankara would be his puppet and would use him to strengthen the Western agenda in West Africa. To his dismay, Sankara turned out to be a revolutionary hothead who believed that all of the other heads of state in West Africa were corrupt reactionaries. He traveled all over the region, preaching revolution and scaring some of the friends of Ivory Coast, including France and United States. Sankara, a great admirer of Gaddafi, had signs hung all over the city of Ouagadougou denouncing U.S. imperialism. When he talked revolution, therefore, Sankara was using Gaddafi as a role model. Boigny was the face of U.S. imperialism and French neocolonialism in Africa, while Gaddafi was the face of revolution against Western imperialism and neocolonialism. Boigny did not like the fact that the man he had helped rise to power had refused to become his puppet, and instead waged war against imperialism and neocolonialism. Ivory Coast felt Sankara was hurting the image of the entire French community in West Africa and would eventually hurt Ivory Coast. As a result, it sponsored a violent coup in Burkina Faso that replaced Sankara with his deputy Blaise Compaoré, who later became Boigny's puppet. Apart from destabilizing other countries, Boigny is infamously remembered from his economically thoughtless act of spending a tenth of Ivory Coast's GDP to build what the Guinness Book of Records lists as the world's largest church. The GDP of Ivory Coast in 1985 was $6.9 billion US. The same year, the government commissioned largest church in the world at an estimated cost of between $400 and $600 million, or about a tenth of the country's GDP. The construction of the church came at a time when Ivory Coast was facing a biting economic crisis after the sharp fall of coffee and cocoa prices, which were the cornerstones of the economy. During this time, a wise leader would diversify the economy, moving the country away from over-reliance on agriculture towards manufacturing and industrialization. However, Boigny decided to set aside a budget totaling to about a tenth of the country's GDP to build the world's largest church in his home village. Boigny believed it would become a pilgrimage site for African Catholics, the way Muslims go to Mecca. Unfortunately, it never became.